When I first bought my house, I had no idea that the biggest problem I'd face wouldn't be the leaky plumbing, the stubborn lawn that refused to grow no matter how much fertilizer I dumped on it, or even the scorching summer heat that made my electricity bills skyrocket. No, my real headache came in the form of my new neighbors, specifically, the HOA president, a woman named Karen, and her little circle of friends who seemed to think the entire neighborhood was their private kingdom. The house itself was a dream come true for me. A single-story ranch-style home, tucked just far enough from the main road to give me some peace but still close enough to town so I could get to work without spending an hour on the highway. The real selling point, though, was the pool. A big, sparkling, crystal-clear pool that stretched almost the entire width of my backyard. When I first saw it during the showing, I could practically hear the summer afternoons of floating in the water, grilling some burgers, and enjoying a cold beer under the shade of my umbrella. I worked hard for years to afford a place like this, and I wasn't about to let anyone ruin it for me. At first, things were quiet. I'd see neighbors walking their dogs, waving as they passed by. Even Karen was cordial at first, smiling a little too wide but still saying all the right neighborly things about how great the neighborhood was and how happy she was to have someone who cares about the community moving in. I didn't pay much attention to it, figuring she was just one of those overly chatty neighbors who like to keep track of everyone's business. That peaceful honeymoon period didn't last long. It started with small things. A passive-aggressive note in my mailbox reminding me that trash cans needed to be stored out of view after pickup day, even though I had already done so. Then came a friendly knock on my door where Karen reminded me about the neighborhood guidelines for how high grass could be and how certain types of lawn decorations weren't allowed. I smiled, nodded, and told her I'd take care of it. And I did, not because I cared about her rules, but because I genuinely didn't want to start off on the wrong foot. But I could tell even then that Karen wasn't just being helpful. She was testing me, pushing me, seeing if I'd roll over and do whatever she said. Everything really went off the rails the day I caught her in my backyard. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of those blazing summer days where the air feels like it's sticking to your skin. I had been running errands all morning and was looking forward to taking a quick dip in the pool before firing up the grill. As I walked around the side of the house toward the backyard, I heard laughter. At first, I thought maybe it was just some neighbors talking nearby, but then I heard a splash. My stomach dropped. I stepped into the yard, and there they were, Karen and two of her friends, lounging on my deck chairs like they owned the place, drinks in hand, one of them floating lazily in the pool. For a second, I just stood there, too stunned to speak. Then I barked out something along the lines of, "What the hell are you doing?" which made them all jump. Karen, to my utter disbelief, had the audacity to act offended. She climbed out of the pool slowly, like she was the one being wronged, and told me they were just cooling off, and that it wasn't a big deal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only had they trespassed onto my property, but they also acted like I was the one being unreasonable for telling them to leave. I forced them out, making sure they took their drinks and towels with them, and locked the gate behind them. I figured that would be the end of it, that the embarrassment of being caught would be enough to make them think twice before doing it again. I was wrong. The very next weekend, I caught them at it again. This time, they didn't even look embarrassed. They just rolled their eyes when I told them to leave, muttered something under their breath, and walked out. That was when I realized this wasn't just some innocent mistake. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they thought they could get away with it. I had a decision to make, either keep letting them get away with it until I eventually lost my mind, or start fighting back. I started with cameras. I installed a few around the perimeter of my backyard, making sure to cover every angle. I even put up a clear, private property, no trespassing, sign on the gate so there'd be no excuse. The very first night after installing them, I caught footage of Karen and one of her friends slipping into my yard after dark, giggling like teenagers as they tiptoed to the pool. I downloaded the footage, saved it to 3 separate drives, and decided I wasn't going to let this slide. The next morning, I printed a still image from the video and taped it to Karen's front door with a note that said, "This is trespassing. Next time, the police get involved." I thought that would finally scare them off. Instead, Karen doubled down. A week later, I got a letter from the HOA citing me for violating community standards because my cameras were not in compliance with the neighborhood aesthetic. I almost laughed when I read it. They were seriously trying to fine me for protecting my own property. That was when I knew this was war. I went to the next HOA meeting, which I had never attended before, and confronted Karen in front of everyone. I laid out exactly what had been happening, showed them stills from the footage, and made it clear that if they tried to fine me again, I'd be pressing charges for harassment and trespassing. Some of the neighbors looked shocked, others looked like they had known about this behavior for a long time but were too afraid to say anything. Karen tried to talk over me, but I didn't let her. I made sure every word hit like a hammer. After that meeting, things got quiet for a while, but it was the kind of quiet that feels like the calm before a storm. Karen didn't say a word to me, didn't send me any more letters, and didn't set foot on my property. But I could feel the tension every time I saw her walking by. I knew she was plotting something, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. I started keeping a log of everything, dates, times, screenshots from my cameras, anything that could help me build a case if I needed to. And sure enough, a few weeks later, I caught her again. This time, though, I didn't just have video. I had audio, thanks to the upgraded cameras I had installed. I could hear her and her friends laughing about how I couldn't stop them and how they were going to keep doing this all summer. That was the last straw. I wasn't just going to warn them anymore. It was time to make sure they paid for every single time they disrespected me and my home. Once I made up my mind that I was done playing nice, I shifted gears completely. I wasn't just going to protect my pool anymore, I was going to make sure Karen and her little clique regretted ever stepping foot on my property. My first move was to tighten security even more. I upgraded my fence to one of those tall, black wrought iron styles with a self-locking gate. I had a locksmith install a keypad entry system that changed codes every 2 weeks, just to be safe. Then, I added motion-activated floodlights around the yard so bright they could practically blind you if you stepped inside at night. This turned my backyard into what felt like a fortress, but I wasn't satisfied yet. The cameras I had were decent, but I swapped them out for a professional-grade system with remote access so I could check in anytime, from anywhere. I even got one of those loud, ear-piercing alarms that would go off if the gate opened without authorization. The first night everything was set up, I sat in my living room with a cold beer, almost hoping they would try to sneak in. Sure enough, around 11, my phone pinged with a motion alert. I pulled up the live feed, and there they were, Karen and 2 of her friends again, creeping toward the gate with towels in hand. The moment one of them tried to pull it open, the alarm blared so loudly it echoed through the entire neighborhood. They screamed, dropped their towels, and bolted like kids caught stealing candy. I couldn't stop laughing. The next morning, Karen had the nerve to send me an angry email claiming that the alarm was disturbing the peace and that she would report me to the HOA board. I forwarded her email, along with the security footage, straight to the local police department, filing a formal trespassing complaint. The officer I spoke to was surprisingly sympathetic. He told me he'd send a patrol car by that evening to have a friendly chat with my neighbors about staying off private property. That should have been the end of it, but with people like Karen, you never really win that easily. A few days later, I noticed a letter taped to my mailbox. It was another fine from the HOA, this time claiming that my fence height was out of compliance. They wanted me to tear it down and replace it with something shorter, something easier for Karen to climb over, no doubt. That was when I decided to go nuclear. I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a local guy who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for absolutely dismantling boards that abused their power. When I showed him all the footage, emails, and fines, he grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. "You've got them," he said. This isn't just harassment, this is abuse of authority. We drafted a formal cease and desist letter and sent it to the entire HOA board, demanding that all fines be rescinded and threatening a lawsuit if the harassment continued. We also made it clear that we had evidence of repeated trespassing, which could easily be taken to court. The reaction was better than I could have hoped for. The board immediately called an emergency meeting, which of course I attended. When I walked in, I could feel every eye in the room on me. Karen sat at the head of the table, red-faced and tight-lipped, clearly furious that I had escalated things. My lawyer came with me, and he wasn't there to play nice. He laid out everything in detail, showing timestamps of every trespassing incident, playing clips of Karen and her friends laughing about breaking into my pool, and presenting the letter we had sent. You could practically hear a pin drop by the time he was done. A couple of the board members looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Finally, one of them spoke up and said they would rescind the fines and look into the trespassing issue. My lawyer leaned back, smiled, and said, "Good. Because if this isn't resolved, we'll see you in court." After that meeting, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted completely. Karen avoided me like the plague, but I could tell she was seething. Her friends still shot me dirty looks whenever they passed my house, but none of them set foot in my yard again. And that might have been enough for most people, but I wasn't done yet. See, I had spent weeks dealing with stress, harassment, and violations of my privacy, and I wasn't about to just let them walk away without feeling some real consequences. So I decided to get creative. I installed a secondary locking mechanism on the gate, one that sent me a direct notification anytime it was tampered with. Then, I hired a couple of guys to come over one weekend and install a brand new pool cover, a heavy-duty, tamper-proof one that locked into place and could only be opened with a special key. I wanted to make sure that even if Karen somehow got into my yard again, she wouldn't be able to touch the water. But I didn't stop there. I printed out flyers with a still shot from my security footage, Karen and her friends in my pool, and dropped them anonymously into every mailbox in the neighborhood with a note that simply said, "These are your HOA leaders." I didn't sign my name, of course, but everyone knew where it came from. The fallout was immediate. Neighbors started whispering every time Karen walked by. People started showing up to HOA meetings who had never attended before, demanding answers. I heard from one of my neighbors down the street that Karen had been voted out as HOA president during a closed-door session. When I heard the news, I popped open a beer and sat by my pool, enjoying the quiet for the first time in months. And still, I wasn't fully satisfied. I wanted them to pay, literally. So I filed a civil suit against Karen for repeated trespassing and harassment, seeking damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and the cost of all the security upgrades I had been forced to install. She fought it at first, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. We had the videos, the emails, the witness statements from neighbors who had seen her sneaking into my yard. When the court date came, she didn't stand a chance. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me several $1,000s in damages. Watching Karen's face as the verdict was read was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. She had gone from smug and entitled to humiliated and broke in a matter of minutes. When I got the check a few weeks later, I didn't just cash it, I used it to throw a massive pool party and invited the entire neighborhood. I grilled burgers, set up speakers with music, and let everyone swim until midnight. The only rule was that Karen and her friends weren't welcome. People had a blast, and by the end of the night, half the neighborhood had come by at least once to thank me for finally putting her in her place. That party was the turning point. From then on, Karen kept to herself, and the HOA board stopped bothering me entirely. But deep down, I knew I still had the upper hand, because I still had all the footage, all the records, and a neighborhood full of witnesses who now knew exactly what kind of person Karen really was. For a few weeks, life actually felt normal. The neighborhood was quiet, my pool was mine again, and the air didn't feel thick with tension every time I stepped outside. I thought maybe Karen had finally learned her lesson, that losing her position on the HOA board, paying me damages, and becoming the talk of the neighborhood had been enough to keep her in check. But people like Karen don't give up that easily. Deep down, I knew she was stewing, plotting something, and sure enough, she made her next move in a way only someone as vindictive and entitled as her could. It started one evening when I came home from work and found a city code enforcement officer standing in my driveway, clipboard in hand. He explained that there had been multiple anonymous complaints about illegal alterations to my property, specifically my fence, my security cameras, and even my pool itself. I invited him to come take a look, knowing full well I hadn't done anything wrong. As we walked the property together, I could feel my anger building. This was Karen's doing. Who else would be petty enough to weaponize city code enforcement just to try to make my life miserable? The officer, to his credit, was professional and reasonable. He noted that everything appeared to be in compliance, took a few photos, and said he'd file his report dismissing the complaints. But before he left, he gave me a sympathetic look and said, "Off the record, sir, I've been out here 3 times this month for complaints about this address. Someone's clearly trying to cause you trouble." That night, I sat by my pool with a beer, staring at the dark water and thinking. Karen wasn't just trying to be annoying now, she was trying to get me in real legal trouble. If the wrong inspector came by, if someone decided to push hard enough, I could be forced to tear down my fence or even face fines from the city. That was when I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. I called my lawyer the next morning and told him what was happening. He wasn't surprised. "People like this rarely stop," he said. "They just change tactics." Together, we filed a formal harassment complaint with the city, naming Karen as the likely source of the false reports and requesting that any further complaints be logged and tracked. That gave me a little peace of mind, but I knew I had to be proactive. So, I added yet another layer of security, this time, hidden cameras facing the street, designed to catch anyone approaching my property. Sure enough, just a few nights later, I caught Karen on camera again. She wasn't trying to get into the pool this time. Instead, she was standing near my fence with her phone out, snapping photos and muttering to herself. I saved the footage, sent it to my lawyer, and decided to raise the stakes even higher. This time, I didn't just go to the HOA or the police. I went public. I joined the neighborhood Facebook group, which I had previously ignored, and made a post laying everything out. I uploaded a short, clear video clip of Karen sneaking around my yard at night, along with a brief message explaining the harassment I had been dealing with for months. I didn't rant, I didn't call her names, I just laid out the facts. The response was explosive. Within hours, dozens of neighbors had commented, most of them expressing shock and outrage. Several admitted they'd had similar experiences with Karen, unsolicited visits, nitpicking over minor rule violations, even trespassing incidents. The post went semi-viral within the neighborhood, with people sharing their own stories and tagging others to come see what Karen has been up to. That public exposure was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just my problem anymore, she was everyone's problem. At the next HOA meeting, which I made sure to attend, the turnout was massive. People I'd never seen before showed up, demanding answers from the remaining board members about how Karen had been allowed to run things unchecked for so long. When Karen herself tried to speak, the crowd practically shouted her down. It was the first time I'd ever seen her look genuinely rattled. She tried to defend herself, saying the videos were taken out of context, and that she had permission to be on my property, which was a blatant lie, but no one believed her. The board announced that they were conducting a full internal review of her actions during her time as president, and several neighbors openly called for her to be permanently banned from holding any HOA position again. But Karen wasn't going to go down quietly. A week later, I woke up to find that someone had thrown raw eggs at my house, smeared shaving cream on my mailbox, and dumped what looked like a bag of trash in my driveway. I reviewed my security footage, and sure enough, there was Karen's car pulling up around 2 in the morning. She got out, did her little act of vandalism, and sped off. That was the final nail in the coffin. I called the police again, this time filing criminal charges for vandalism and trespassing. The officer I spoke with told me they'd had multiple calls about Karen recently and that she was quickly becoming known as a neighborhood nuisance. They arrested her that afternoon. Watching the squad car pull up to her house and seeing her led away in handcuffs was a moment I'll never forget. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People who had been on the fence about me, no pun intended, finally saw that I had been telling the truth all along. The HOA board issued an official statement condemning Karen's behavior and promising reforms to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. Several neighbors even came by personally to apologize for not believing me sooner. It felt good, but I wasn't celebrating just yet. I still had a court date ahead, and I wanted to make sure every single piece of evidence was ready to go. When the hearing came, my lawyer absolutely dismantled Karen's case. The judge not only found her guilty of vandalism and trespassing but also extended a restraining order preventing her from coming within 50 feet of my property for the next 2 years. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in months. The harassment was finally over, legally, officially over. Karen had gone from the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood to a disgraced ex-president with a criminal record. I knew she wouldn't dare come near me again. That night, I stood on my deck, looking out over my pool, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could just enjoy the peace. I didn't have to worry about who might be sneaking into my yard or what petty stunt Karen might pull next. I had won. But deep down, there was still a part of me that felt like this story wasn't over yet. People like Karen don't just disappear, and if she ever decided to come back, I'd be ready for her. After the court ruling, the energy in the neighborhood shifted completely. For months, the tension had been like a heavy fog over the whole block, people afraid to speak up, afraid to get on Karen's bad side, afraid of what drama might unfold next. But once the restraining order was in place and the HOA formally removed Karen from any position of power, it was as if someone had flipped a switch. Neighbors who had barely made eye contact with me before started stopping by to chat when I was mowing the lawn or sitting outside on the deck. They wanted to know the details of what had happened, of course, but they also just seemed relieved that someone had finally stood up to the neighborhood tyrant. Some even admitted that they had been waiting for someone to do exactly what I did, to push back, to set a precedent, to show Karen she wasn't untouchable. I didn't just want to sit back and enjoy the peace. I wanted to build on what I had accomplished. I took all the security measures I had installed and turned them into a positive feature of the house rather than a reminder of past conflict. I landscaped around the new fence, planting shrubs and climbing vines so it looked less like a fortress and more like a private garden retreat. I had the pool deck refinished, added some new lighting, and even splurged on an outdoor sound system so I could play music when I had friends over. Pretty soon, my backyard wasn't just a place for me to relax, it became the unofficial social hub of the block. I started hosting small gatherings on weekends, inviting a few neighbors at a time to come by, grill some burgers, and let their kids swim. It felt good to reclaim the space that Karen had tried so hard to steal from me and turn it into something positive for everyone. At first, I was hesitant about being too open, worried that if Karen somehow caught wind of what I was doing, she might try something else. But she was nowhere to be seen. The restraining order had teeth, and after the arrest, she seemed to have retreated completely. Word around the neighborhood was that she had been quietly forced to sell her house. Apparently, she was facing not just my lawsuit but a pile of legal fees from other neighbors who had filed their own complaints against her once my case became public. She had spent years lording over everyone, writing petty citations, handing out fines, and nitpicking over every little violation, and now it was all coming back to her. Karma had finally caught up. One afternoon, I was out by the pool cleaning the filter when a neighbor named Tom, who lived 2 houses down, came by with a case of beer. He told me that there was going to be a special HOA election to replace the board members who had either resigned or been voted out in the wake of the scandal. To my surprise, he asked me if I would consider running for a seat on the board. At first, I laughed. After everything I'd been through, the last thing I wanted was to be part of the HOA. But Tom made a good point. If people like you don't run, people like her get in, he said, nodding toward Karen's old house. We need someone who actually cares about the community, not just about bossing people around. I told him I'd think about it, but even then, I knew my answer. By the time the election rolled around, I had made up my mind. I ran for a seat and ended up winning by a landslide. Apparently, my reputation had grown more than I realized. I wasn't just the guy with the pool anymore. I was the guy who had taken down Karen, the guy who had stood up for himself and, in a way, for everyone else too. As a board member, I pushed for a complete overhaul of how rules were enforced. Instead of the old system where the president and a few friends handed out fines like candy, we created a transparent process where residents could appeal citations and where every fine had to be approved by a majority vote. We also removed several outdated, ridiculous rules, including the one that would have forced me to lower my fence, and replaced them with guidelines that made sense. It wasn't long before the neighborhood started to feel like an actual community rather than a fiefdom. People were friendlier, gatherings were more common, and there was a sense that everyone was working together rather than living under constant surveillance. I can't tell you how many times neighbors came up to me and thanked me, not just for what I had done for myself, but for what I had done for them. It was a strange feeling. I never set out to be some kind of hero, I just wanted to protect my own home. But in the process, I had ended up making things better for everyone. As for Karen, the last I heard, she had moved to a different town about 30 miles away. Some people said she was keeping a low profile, others said she was already causing trouble in her new neighborhood. I honestly didn't care. She was out of my life, and that was enough for me. Still, I kept all the footage, all the documentation, all the legal paperwork, not because I thought I'd ever need it again, but because it served as a reminder. A reminder that standing up for yourself is worth it, even when it's exhausting, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. By the end of that summer, my pool had become a symbol of victory. I hosted what we jokingly called the Neighborhood Freedom Party, a massive barbecue with food, drinks, music, and games. Almost everyone showed up. People brought their own coolers, kids splashed in the water, and someone even set up a cornhole tournament in my front yard. At one point, as the sun was setting and the sky was streaked with pink and gold, I sat back in my lounge chair and just watched everyone laughing, talking, and having a good time. It hit me then just how far things had come. My house was no longer the battleground it had been. It was a gathering place, a spot where people felt welcome and safe. That night, after everyone had gone home and the yard was quiet again, I walked over to the pool and dipped my hand into the cool water. The reflection of the porch lights danced across the surface, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. True, unshakable peace. Karen had tried to take that from me, to make my life miserable, to break me down until I either gave up or gave in. But she had failed. And as I stood there, with the sounds of crickets chirping in the distance and the smell of grilled food still lingering in the air, I realized that I hadn't just beaten her. I had won something far more important: my freedom, my dignity, and my place in the neighborhood. Life after Karen felt almost surreal. The absence of constant conflict took some getting used to. For so long, I had been bracing myself for the next note in the mailbox, the next complaint, the next confrontation. But now my mornings were quiet, my evenings were peaceful, and I could sit out by the pool without scanning the gate every 5 minutes. I finally got to use the space the way I'd always imagined, floating on a raft on lazy summer afternoons, grilling dinner with a drink in my hand, letting the warm glow of the lights reflect across the water at night. It was more than just a pool, it was proof that I had taken back control of my life. And it wasn't just me who noticed the change. The neighborhood itself seemed to breathe easier. People were friendlier, kids played outside more, and the general mood of the community was lighter. The constant fear of, "What will Karen say?" had vanished, and in its place was something I had never seen here before, unity. But as much as I tried to move forward, Karen's shadow wasn't completely gone. Every now and then, I'd overhear bits and pieces about her from neighbors who still had connections in the next town over. Apparently, she hadn't learned her lesson. The stories were eerily familiar, complaints about her meddling with other people's property, trying to take over their HOA, and picking fights with her neighbors. The difference this time was that people were ready for her. One neighbor told me that thanks to my viral post and the public record of her arrest, Karen's reputation had followed her. People Googled her name and saw everything. She wasn't able to run roughshod over her new community the way she had over ours. In fact, from what I heard, she had been removed from that neighborhood's HOA within months of moving in. Some people just never change, I guess. I didn't let her continued antics bother me. If anything, it made me grateful for how far I'd come. I had taken one of the most stressful experiences of my life and turned it into something that actually made me stronger. And that strength had a ripple effect. More neighbors started coming to me for advice, not just about HOA disputes, but about home repairs, landscaping, even security cameras. I became, almost by accident, a leader in the community, someone people trusted to be fair and level-headed. It was a strange feeling for a guy who had never even wanted to get involved with the HOA in the first place. But I took the responsibility seriously. I pushed for better communication between the board and residents, more transparency with finances, and a focus on building the community instead of policing it. By the next year, we had block parties scheduled every season, a neighborhood watch that actually worked together instead of spying on each other, and a shared email list so people could communicate directly about concerns before they escalated into drama. That second summer after Karen's departure was the best one yet. The pool became a tradition. Every Friday night was an open swim night where families could come over, bring snacks, and relax. I invested in a projector and started doing movie nights, shining films on a big white sheet by the poolside while kids floated on inflatable rafts and parents sat around chatting. What had once been the epicenter of stress and conflict had turned into the heart of the neighborhood. There was something deeply satisfying about that transformation, not just because it felt like I had won, but because it meant something good had come out of all the chaos. There was one moment in particular that stood out as the perfect symbol of closure. It was late summer, and I was hosting another big cookout. We had music playing, burgers sizzling on the grill, kids laughing and splashing in the water. I was standing on the deck talking with a few neighbors when a car slowed down out front. At first, I didn't think anything of it. We often had extra cars in the neighborhood during these parties. But then I saw who was inside. Karen. She was sitting in the driver's seat, just watching. She didn't get out, didn't roll down her window, she just sat there for a moment, staring at the scene, and then drove off. I don't know what she was thinking, but I know what I felt. Not anger. Not fear. Not even triumph. Just peace. For the first time, I realized that I had no interest in fighting her anymore. She was no longer a threat. Whatever power she thought she had over me was gone. That night, after everyone left and the yard was quiet again, I sat by the pool with a drink in hand, staring at the still water. I thought back to that first day I caught her trespassing, to the months of stress and anger, to the lawsuits and the meetings and the drama. It had been exhausting, no doubt about it. There were moments I had considered selling the house and just starting over somewhere else. But if I had done that, she would have won. And standing there now, with the neighborhood stronger and happier than it had ever been, I was glad I hadn't given up. Sometimes you have to dig in your heels, take a stand, and refuse to be bullied, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. By the time I finally went inside that night, I felt like I had truly closed a chapter. Karen might still exist out there somewhere, still looking for someone to control, still causing chaos in some other poor neighborhood, but that wasn't my problem anymore. My story with her was over. What remained was a house I loved, a neighborhood that had become a real community, and a pool that was mine, fully, completely mine, at last. And that, I decided, was the real victory. Not the lawsuit, not the restraining order, not the money I had been awarded. The real victory was that she hadn't broken me. If anything, she had made me stronger. And every time I stepped out onto that deck and heard the laughter of friends and neighbors floating across the water, I knew that no one, not Karen, not anyone, was ever going to take that away from me again.